Capital Views is sponsored by North Rim Bank, Alaska Oil and Gas Association, ConocoPhillips, and Linden.
Hi, I'm Tim Bradner with Alaska Legislative Digest, and welcome to Capitol Views. And a special welcome today to Senator Mike Shower of Mat-Su, who is the Senate Minority Leader. So thanks for joining us, Senator Shower.
My pleasure.
Senator, maybe we could start out by explaining what we haven't had a Senate minority in a couple of years. And just to be correct, this is the Senate Republican minority because the coalition in the Senate has a few Republicans mixed in with the Democrats. But maybe you could explain what just the mechanics of a minority, why it's important, what it takes to formally have one, and maybe why we didn't have one the past couple of years. So thank you, Senator.
So normally, if you look at the uniform rules, which is what we operate under as a legislative body, there are 60 legislators in Alaska, 40 House members, 20 senators. So we'll focus on the Senate since that's where I'm at. With 20 senators, we have 11 Republicans and we have 9 Democrats. Normally, what happens in those uniform rules, it defines the size of a recognized minority and a majority. Normally, when you get 11, so you have a majority of the 20 members, if you get 11 or more, you're considered the majority, in which case they have control. They have the president, the majority leader, the rules chair, all the committee chairs, where a lot of the power resides in the structure to be able to move bills, implement policy, etc. And normally, there's also a minority. Now, often in the past, that minority would be the opposite party. If you had, say, 12 Republicans and 8 Democrats, things like that we have had, the 12 Republicans would be a majority and the 8 Democrats would be a minority. There's different numbers for that based on how many seats on committees you get and the size of your minority. But you would have kind of opposing parties, Republican, Democrat, as you want to call it, just like in the federal system. So what normally would happen is you would have a certain amount of Republicans or Democrats in the majority and the minority. In Alaska's history, we have typically had usually a Democrat or two will join the Republicans. For some number of decades, we've had Republican majorities in the legislature, and 1 or 2 would join. There's also been a few times in 10, 12 years ago plus, or in recent history, where we've had coalitions where you had more Republicans join Democrats to form a bipartisan coalition, even though there's more Republicans, which normally would have control of the body. So that was, I think they called it the Muskox caucus many years ago, kind of happened that way. And in more recent history, we've had that where you've had this coalition. And the last legislative session for 2 years, because we work in a 2-year cycle, had 17 members. So there were a number of Republicans with the Democrats joined into a supermajority. And 3 of us were kind of shoved into a super minority, even though we were not a recognized minority. By those uniform rules that I mentioned, you have to have at least 5 members in your minority to be recognized. And what that means is you get a minority leader, a minority whip, you get resources like press and legal counsel, et cetera, and you get guaranteed seats on certain committees, all the standing committees, et cetera. If you're less than that, in that case we were, they could choose to still recognize you and give you resources and committees, or they could choose to basically just completely shove you into the closet. And that's kind of what they did to us the last 2 years. This time around, we actually ended up with 6 minority members. So we are a recognized minority by the rules. They have to follow that because that's legal law. Uniform rules are actually above statutes, if that makes sense to folks. So this year around, we have 6. So we have members in all the committees. We have myself, that's the minority leader that kind of runs the caucus of minority. And you also have members on every committee. So, and the last point to yours that I'll stop there is that you said, why is it important? It's always important, right? What you don't necessarily want is to have a body that completely swings one direction. You want that yin and that yang, right? That balance. So having a minority as the opposing voice that allows the other side to have its voice heard in committees and on the floor, which provides that balance as we're doing that, because that's our system of government. Our constitutional republic was meant to not move too fast. And so you have 2 sides to every argument. And sometimes one side has more power, sometimes the other side does. And that's where we are.
So in a sense, it's thinking in terms of of a parliamentary system, you're sort of the opposition, the loyal opposition, so to speak.
That's
And
exactly right.
it's your responsibility to speak up and point out other points of views and make sure that all perspectives are shared to the public.
You bet. And sometimes we agree. Sometimes we're unanimous on the vote. Sometimes you might see the minority stick together and it's completely in opposition to the coalition. Like you said, there's, I think, 5 Republicans that joined the 9 Democrats, which is why there's a coalition of 14 right now. but they're outnumbered 2-1 in that particular one. So it's really important for us to make sure that the other side of the aisle's views, Republican views, conservatives, et cetera, have that voice, and that's that kind of, like you said, that parliamentary opposition where we're not silenced and we have the ability to voice those concerns, so that we have a broad debate across the board. So it's just a natural balance to the system.
Senator, so this year, what points of view do you want to make sure you get across?
I think our minority caucus, if you want to look at the big things that concern us that we generally agree upon, are things like energy, an energy plan for the state, because that's obviously very important for us. Education has been at the top of everyone's list. As you know, we've been debating that vigorously for 2 months now. And the economy for us, because if we don't grow our economy, it's going to be hard to do anything as far as public or private sector. So those are some of our big focus areas. For me, as you know, Tim, we talked about it. I've been really key on elections, trying to do election reform to tighten the system up, to clean up our voter rolls, et cetera. There's lots of room for improvement in there. And those are, I think, some of the big things that we're working on. But as you know, the oxygen has been kind of sucked out of the room with education for this first 2 months, which is a little unusual. Normally, it gets the last 2 months of the session gets busy. We've been really busy from day one here. So it's an interesting turn of events. That's not how we normally operate.
Well, the other thing about this year is what sucks the oxygen out of the room is the shortage of revenues and the tight budget. And any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
From the
matter of fact, I have a newsletter right here, and I won't bore you with the details, but I'm looking right at the numbers from legislative finance, verified with finance co-chairs, where I've sat down to go over them. And as of today, we're about 410-ish, plus or minus, $1 million in deficit spending. And once you add in, if we do education spending, that's going to put us up around $600 million short. And that means we only have two options. We either have to draw down the PFD further, or we have to draw from the CBR. Those are our only two things. So right now, we've been kicking the can down the road. You may remember we had about 17 billion in the ERA when I got here, and like 12 billion in the CBR. Those are mostly gone. So we've kicked the can down the road as far as we can. We've been in deficit spending for some time. We've just been drawing down those numbers. Now the chickens have come home to roost, and we're looking at those numbers going, okay, now we actually are upside down. Any more we draw down is going to be in danger of affecting people that need the help with the PFD, or we're going to draw even further from our savings. So we put ourselves into a bit of a square corner here.
Yeah, the chickens are coming home to roost, so to speak.
They
Senator,
are.
in the time we have just a couple minutes we have left, what just tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you've been around the Capitol a long time. We've actually had you on this program before, but what's your background? Of course, you live in Matsu, and what have you done professionally?
So I was military veteran, 24 years in the Air Force. I flew F-15s, F-22, so I was a fighter pilot. Natural progression after I retired out of Elmendorf some time ago. I went into the airlines, so I fly for FedEx as an airline captain as my side job, I guess now. And through a weird turn of events, got appointed into a seat 8 years ago. So I've been here 8 years now, representing what is now District O, up in the Matsu. It goes from Valdez all the way through the Matsu up to Clear Air Force Station. So it's a really big district, about the size of West Virginia. So I still fly airplanes for a living in the interim, and then of course I have the legislative sessions. So it's been a rather busy lifestyle. I thought my life was going to throttle back, and instead it's been throttled up for the last 8 years. So it's a very, very busy time.
Well, it sort of comes with the territory. Well,
It does.
Senator, thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
My pleasure, Tim. Thanks for giving us a voice, and we're happy to come on anytime and tell you what the minority's been up to.
Thank you, Senator. This is Tim Bradner with Legislative Digest, and thanks for joining us with Capitol Views.